welcome back, ladies.
Hello, hello.
So good to see you. And welcome to everyone to the Contract Podcast, where we talk about the deals we make
And
and those
those
that
that
break.
break.
So today we have a really interesting topic, and we're going to start off talking about a case involving a logistics company. It's very recent. That had a little bit of a snafu involving a pregnant worker. So I'm going to dive right into those details and just give you all the facts as I know them. So in February 2021, there is a young lady named Chelsea Walsh. She worked for a company called Total Quality Logistics, TQL, whereby during that time she underwent an emergency cervical procedure to prevent early labor. So she's got an emergency procedure that her doctor placed her on modified bed rest and instructed her to work from home.
Okay.
So she took that information and asked that her employer to provide an accommodation. So 4 days after the surgery, she made that request, and TQL's response was to present her with a choice that was pretty impossible. So they gave her the option to come back to the office or to take an unpaid leave of absence. So losing her income, losing her health insurance. So that's pretty impossible for most people to sort
Mhm.
of grapple to manage. So she did what a lot of people would do. She returned to the office. And then she gave birth to her daughter, Magnolia, at just 20 weeks and 6 days. So when Magnolia was born, Magnolia had a heartbeat, she was breathing, and she also had fetal movement. She was placed on her mother's chest, is what was reported, but unfortunately, 90 minutes later, she died.
Mm. Wow.
So a few weeks ago, last month, on March 18th, so this is more than 5 years later, a jury found that TQL was responsible for Magnolia's death, and they ordered the company to pay $22.5 million dollars to the family. And the attorney's family stated that Chelsea Walsh was just following her doctor's instructions for a high risk pregnancy and simply asked to work from home, and that the jury found that TQL's denial of that reasonable request led to the death of her daughter. So these are the words of the attorney.
Mhm.
So there is a detail in this case that is, pretty relevant also. So her husband spoke with a human resources team member at the company where he worked, and that person reached out to TQL's vice president and inform them of what the situation was as it was unfolding, what was going on, and just as any loving husband, concerned husband would do. So that VP's response, so the VP's response to the HR team member for where her husband worked, upon hearing what happened, thanked them and said, "You've just saved us from a lawsuit." So then TQL approved the accommodation, but at that point in time, it was too late. That same day, Chelsea began experiencing complications.
Wow. That's a lot.
So when you hear that, I have a couple of, uh, I have a question for you guys. So when you look at, what happened with TQL, so they had the initial denial, the paperwork issues that were in existence. So there was a wrong paperwork that was filled out. The VP who recognized that it was wrong but only acted when he was informed outside of the normal chain of how that he should get informed, right? So the company was informed by someone outside of the company. What do you see? Do you see this as a policy failure? Is it a leadership failure, a culture failure, all three, some combination? Like, what is going on?
Oh my gosh, this one is so tough because I always come back to leadership. What I thought about as you as you summarize that, Eva, is that this is a situation that is waiting for an exception. It's waiting for someone to say, "We need this outcome, so let's work backwards from the outcome that makes the most sense ethically, professional, and just
Oh, I
humanistically,"
so
right?
agree.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So for me, it's a leadership issue in light of policy and in light of culture, but someone at the top had to say, independent of whatever policy is on the books or not on the books, here's what needs to happen, and we'll change accordingly to
Right.
make sure that this woman won.
We know what the right outcome
That's
is. I
right.
don't care what documentation, what crazy policy you might have. We know what the right outcome
It's a
is.
human intervention that AI can't get us. It's a human intervention that policies can't sometimes drive us all to.
Yeah.
What do
Mhm.
you think, Amber?
Well, and you're hitting on again this human qualities, and we've been talking about this for
Mhm.
the past several podcasts, right? So when I hear this extremely sad case, you think about judgment,
Mhm.
empathy. You know, this young woman who took the time to try to put themselves in her place. Uh, and yes, it is a leadership, call and leadership at different levels, right? But I also have to say that I don't want to discount that culture failure because you can have bad leaders in a good culture
Yep.
because the culture, can eat policy for lunch, every day, right? A strong, positive culture can suss out eventually those bad leaders. In this scenario, there were just failures all across the board, right?
It's holistic.
Right. So it to me says that not only was there poor leadership and that was pervasive, but it was in an environment that no one questioned.
Mhm.
Or if they did question, they didn't have the courage
Right.
maybe to stand up. So again, it goes back to those human qualities: courage, ethics, seasoned judgment. It's just horrible. And when those things are absent, unfortunately, this is like the worst of outcomes that can
Yeah.
occur.
Wholeheartedly agree. Leadership courage. It's so you when you say courage, it's leadership courage. It's having that courage to do the right thing, regardless of whether or not it's a popular decision within the culture that exists. So you have a sick culture, you still have an obligation to do the right thing.
What do you guys think the HR manager should have done? I mean, there was one doctor's note, then there was a second doctor's note. I'm sure Chelsea was sitting home and stressed and probably beside herself, worried about her pregnancy. What do you think the HR manager should have done? Help her out a little bit, at least.
So I assume that a company of this size has an HR department, right? So
Yeah, they're pretty big.
it would be impossible for an organization that large to not have an HR function. We know what the managers didn't do right, right? So manager one, manager two were presented with a doctor's note, and the request was denied. The HR professional, and I'm just going to try and keep this really brief, but part of their responsibility as a function is to let leaders know what their obligations are, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they're telling leaders like you need to know all the details. It just means that leaders need to know to come to HR. Assuming that the leaders came to HR and HR had an awareness of this case,
Mhm.
HR should have been guiding that accommodation process because there are laws that cover pregnancy. There's a new law that wasn't applicable at the time because it wasn't in existence then. But there were already other laws on the books: the Pregnancy Discrimination Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act. All they cover
Mhm.
pregnancy and
Yeah.
accommodation requests. And so, one, at the very minimum, follow and adhere to the law. Make sure that you have a process that reviews accommodation requests, and that the company is doing everything that it can to honor that request unless there is an actual undue hardship. For really large organizations, it's nearly impossible to claim undue hardship. So that is what the HR department should have done, is look into that. Managers should know, like, when an employee comes to you and says like, "Hey, I have a doctor's note
Mhm.
that says I need X," to not dismiss it. It's
Yeah.
pretty simple. Don't dismiss it. Hand it over to HR. Let them handle it, and hopefully there's a culture that supports HR in their administration of what needs to happen for an organization to follow the law.
Well, so you're bringing up something that I want to pull this thread a little bit. This is a tragic case, like you
Mhm.
mentioned, Tony. It's really sad on so many different levels. But let's zoom out a bit. This isn't about just one company. It's really about when organizational systems fail, when they're quietly pushing out the humans, or at least the human qualities of it all, like in the decision making,
Mhm.
judgment,
Mhm.
consideration of human dignity, right? The research on ethical organizational culture shows that when all relevant systems are pushing people in the same ethical direction, ethical failure is much less likely. So, meaning that if you have the right systems in place, meaning that we're walking the talk at every level, you're probably going to do the right thing. But the two top reasons employees fail to speak up about wrongdoing are fear of retaliation,
Mm.
right?
Mm,
And a sense
I
of
could see that.
futility.
Yeah.
So that belief that nothing will happen even if they tried
Right.
to do the right thing. And that's a problem. So I would love to hear, like in your experience, what creates organizational cultures where people don't feel that they can push back, where a manager feels more comfortable forwarding a denial note than picking up the phone and asking whether the right thing is being done.
Well, you have walking the talk versus not. So
Mhm.
maybe you're in an organization where there are policies in place, but they only apply to certain people. You're not walking the talk. Um, People believe what they see. They don't necessarily believe what they hear, what you tell them. If you've been working for a long time, especially, there's some skepticism there, and oftentimes justifiably so. And so, if you have cultures where there are, it's understandable when there's penalties for not meeting targets and things of that nature. But if you do it to the exclusion of the humanness, ethical behavior, um, then sometimes you will find yourself running into these kinds of problems. And so, cultures where people don't feel comfortable or safe speaking up, that's a learned behavior. That's a learned behavior that the organization has taught them, that those who speak up, they get retaliated against in all kinds of different ways. And so that's where it comes from. Especially when you have a large organization like that and you have multiple leaders making the same bad decision,
Yeah.
there's something wrong at the top.
Yeah. And now I just want to put in AI into the
Mhm.
story just a little bit. Not that it was necessarily implicit in this particular case, but
Right.
we know that AI is being introduced into organizations at every level, and particularly when it comes to HR, even to the extent that some HR departments are being revamped using agentic AI, right? So when you have this increased use of AI tools, the bot, the agent that's managing workflows, you talked about efficiencies and all that type of thing, Eva.
Mhm.
Um, Accommodation requests, HR decisions that need this judgment. What is the danger if it's really bad if you have on top of that folks that are the humans in the loop
Mhm.
that are underqualified, undertrained, or underempowered to override the system, and not being able to stand up against, you know, what is clearly to the average person something that is not right, right?
Right,
And all I need was somebody to make a phone call or stand up or say no, right?
right. Thanks for listening in on part one of the Contract Podcast episode of Doing the Right Thing in the AI era. Stay tuned for part two, where we'll talk more about what should have happened for a better outcome and give our listeners some more helpful tips. Until then, bye bye.